in terms of something like even the menstrual cycle, which is mentioned in the Quran, and this is something which is, again, fascinating in the sense that Allah says that Allah يَعْلَمُ مَا تَحْمِلُ كُلُّ أُنْثَى وَمَا تَغِيضُ وَمَا تَزْدَادُ. That Allah knows what every female womb produces, and in terms of how it shrinks, and in terms of how it expands. And of course we know now, again through modern science and things like that, that every month at the time of the menses that the actual thickness of the womb changes based on what stage of the month a female might find herself in. And again, it's fascinating that this is mentioned. That, and they say that the thickness which changes is something like 4 or 5 millimeters. It's barely perceptible. And how a human being could have known that and described that is with having, again, no education, no modern scientific knowledge or equipment to describe something like that is just amazing. If you look at the Prophet's life, and again, I could have talked a lot about some of the statements that he's made, which are the hadith, the prophetic statements or the narrations. But there's one particular narration which is just fascinating. And it's a narration which the Prophet says happens to him when he's a small child. He's a young boy of about 3 or 4 years old. And he said that he was with his foster brothers, that they were watching the sheep, and they were shepherding, and 2 angels came and they cut open his breast with light. That they took light and they cut open his breast, and they took his heart out and they placed it in a bucket of snow. And then they poured Zamzam, which is the sort of the equivalent of holy water, but they poured Zamzam over it, over his heart, and removed from his heart a small black spot, and then they put the heart back into his body, and then they sealed up the incision that they made. Now, if you've ever seen, and you should do this, like go to YouTube and type in like heart transplant surgery. You could actually watch this. The way they do heart transplant surgery now is when they take the heart out and they have the donor heart is kept alive by, they have to keep it on ice. They have to keep it like literally a bucket of snow. That's what they keep it in. And then on top of it, they pour over it cryogenic fluid. And cryogenic fluid is full of electrolytes, particularly sodium and potassium. Now what makes Zamzam water very unique, unlike any other water in the world, is not just that there's nobody can explain the source of where Zamzam comes from. That it comes literally in the middle of the desert. But Zamzam water, and they've done studies on this, the chemical composition of Zamzam water is that it is very high in sodium and potassium. It's not like regular water. It has a lot of sodium and potassium in that water. And so the light that is used, it's like, and now they can use lasers to make a more precise incision within the human body. And it's just, the way that that's described is the exact way that they do like heart transplant surgery now, which is, again, one of the greatest modern medical miracles that you have, but again, described 1,400 years ago, how the procedure should be done. And so, I'll end with one last thing. Which is something which perhaps the Muslims in this room also probably have not heard, because it was actually told to me by a friend of mine who's actually a neurosurgeon. And this is something he's been working on and doing the research of this for the past 3 or 4 years. And so this is something that is not published. You can't really Google this anywhere, but I have to give credit to him. His name is Dr. Jawad Shah. He's a neurosurgeon from Canada, somewhere up there in Canada. But what's interesting is that there's a verse in the Quran which he found and a very interesting application for. So the verse in the Quran says that وَلَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ وَنَعْلَمُ مَا تُوَسْوِسُ بِهِ نَفْسُهُ وَنَحْنُ أَقْرَبُ إِلَيْهِ مِنْ حَبْلِ الْوَرِيدِ. That verily we created man, and we know what his own soul whispers to him. And here's the most important part. وَنَحْنُ أَقْرَبُ إِلَيْهِ مِنْ حَبْلِ الْوَرِيدِ. And we are closer to him than his own, what's translated now, if you look it up, what's translated is, we're closer to him than his own jugular vein. Now, what's interesting about this word, habl al-warid, which is used, is that the word habl literally means like a stem. It means a stem. And warid it has two meanings. One, the verb form of it, warada yaridu, it means to carry or to convey something from one place to another. And it also means a rose. Okay? So literally it translates to the stem of the rose. So the vein, if you're not a pre-med major, the veins, obviously they don't carry blood to places. They return blood back to the heart. That's what veins do. So what carries blood to places? It's the arteries, right? So the arteries carry blood to places. Now what's interesting is that once you have the aorta and it branches off, you have the it sends off the two carotids, and then you have the abdominal aorta. What's interesting is that all of the vessels, all of the arteries, branch into smaller and smaller arteries, to arterioles, to capillaries, to venules, veins, and back to the IVC and the SVC, inferior vena cava, superior vena cava, back to the heart. So arteries branch. There's only one place in the human body where you have two arteries that actually come together to form one artery. Okay, it's only one place in the body that this happens, and it happens when you have your two vertebral arteries, which go up in the back of your neck, your two vertebral arteries, which then join together to form the basilar artery. So it's the only place in the body where this happens. So what's interesting though is that the basilar artery is a singular artery which goes up in the back of the back of the head, right near the brainstem, and then it branches off into joining with the internal carotids, forming the circle of Willis. And if you look at, you can Google this, if you type in like MRA angiogram of the brain, and what it looks like is that it looks exactly like a rose. Because you have your stem, which is your basilar artery, then giving you the circle of Willis, and all these other arteries are going all to other parts of your brain, which looks exactly like a rose. Now what's interesting about this is that this place, Allah says that we're closer to you than the stem of this rose. This place where the vertebral arteries join to form the basilar artery, that's called the vertebro-basilar junction, the VB junction. And it's the most delicate place for any neurosurgeon to operate at. It's the most delicate place in the human body because one wrong cut there, then the person will just die. Because what's located exactly at that VB junction is our internal respiratory centers, which literally keep us alive. And so Allah is saying that we are closer to you than that particular place. And it's interesting that one of the early Muslim commentators on the Quran, that on this particular verse, he said that this Habl Walid, it can't be a jugular vein, but rather it has to be some vessel, and again, we didn't have the technology that we have today, but it has to be some vessel in the human body where two other vessels join to form it, and then it carries blood. Not that it returns blood, it has to carry the actual blood. And so, so this now is something that we know now. Now people, if they have even like a vertebrobasilar insufficiency, as it's called, that they can like pass out, or they can stroke out, they can lose consciousness, just if they don't have enough blood flow going there. And so Allah is saying that we are closer to you than that particular place in your body, that if you have just one small wrong thing, that's it. The human being could just fall into a coma or immediate death. So ultimately, that's what I wanted to conclude with that understanding, that for the Muslims, and within the Muslim tradition, that understanding revelation and understanding the divine came through a spirit of research, a spirit of study, and this idea that whatever a human being learns in whatever field, that it actually draws one closer to God. And so this was the early stimulus, this was the motivation that the early communities of Muslims had. And that's what allowed them to not only master the religious sciences, and again, all of these great sciences that Islam produces classically were religious scholars, but at the same time to then take that one step further and to use that religious background, that insight that they gained from Islamic revelation, to literally develop and to take science to another level. And so that's what I want us to appreciate, that all of these verses and all of these statements of the Prophet which have to deal with science, that they correlate and give us insight into scientific phenomena, because this is God's encouragement for man to learn and to find these proofs and to reaffirm his or her faith. And so that's what we'll end with, that